whatever it is, 11th meeting of the Finance Committee meeting to order. The first item on the agenda, as always, is public participation, but seeing none, I guess we'll move on to the next item, which is the Acton Leadership Group. Bear with me while I try and find my notes. Oh, wait a minute, we have another item. We have a new member. The gentleman to my far right is Tom Farley. He is our newest member. And at this point, we are full, complete, done. You got a problem, Nolan? No? Okay. Tom has been on the FinCom before, and we're not going to say how many years ago it was. If he wants to tell you, that's fine. If you want to say something, Tom, introduce yourself, that'd be great. Use the microphone. I know they didn't have microphones when you were on it before. But. We did not.
No, I forget exactly when I was on the FinCom before. I moved to Acton in 1983, been here since, so I think it was probably in the 86, 87, 88 time frame that I served on the committee. Like I said, I've lived here my whole life, married 3 kids who went through the AP school system. They're all out of college, so I finally have some spare time, and here I am.
Thank you. All right, so the next item is the Acton Leadership Group meeting on June 29th. It was, for the most part, the usual first meeting of an ALG, which is going over the ground rules for how it works. There were a few interesting things reported. The schools reported that they believe for FY17 they will have favorable revenue of $775,000 due to a reimbursement on some regional transportation. And they will have turnbacks on expenditures in the $600,000 to $800,000 range. And they attributed a lot to that to health insurance, or lower health insurance than they planned. They said the Leary Field project would come in lower than the expected amount of $450,000. They had bids to do the work for $250,000. And they had some gifts from different athletic groups in town. The town offered no new insight on FY17. However, they did say that they were concerned about the excise tax revenue, that it was flat or flatter than they were expecting, and apparently we have not been buying enough new cars. In terms of the spreadsheet format, there actually was an agreement, at least in principle, to put 1 year of actual results on the ALG spreadsheet. This is something this committee has been after for several years, and previously we've never really gotten even this far. Now, what the actual format will look like, that's all to be worked out, but it was good that we didn't pick up any resistance on it. The special town meeting on December 4th came up. What I requested was to get an early look at next year's budgets, or this year's budgets, since we will essentially be having to do a overview of the town's finances on December 4th as opposed to usually April 4th. There was lukewarm reaction to that. Most of the comment was, yeah, but we have our process, and our budget process takes us to the middle of December before we're ready to discuss anything. And I said, well, based on the current numbers that are in your last year's ALG plan, we have some issues with reserves, things that we've discussed previously at this meeting. But while there was no commitment to get anything out early, I had requested at least estimates by the end of September. While they didn't necessarily commit to it, they did offer to make some effort at it. Based on the clearly a good year in terms of turnbacks for the schools, I suggested that they might consider taking the design funds for the school building project that we'll be talking about on December 4th out of their E&D as opposed to the two towns' reserves. And while it certainly isn't final, that did seem to get some traction. They thought that might be a good idea. The town manager indicated that there may be more items on the special town meeting warrant, but he did not go into any details in terms of what they might be. But if you were thinking it was going to be a one article town meeting, you may have to change your thinking. And other than that, there was an agreement to meet more frequently during the September-October period. ALG usually meets once a month during those months. And because of the upcoming special town meeting, we thought it best that we meet every 2 weeks during September and October, because there might be some things that we have to discuss. Jason, did I get that covered?
The only thing I'd add is that just to pile on to what you said about potentially coming out of E&D for the school design funding, I know that was discussed also at the working group of the school building committee, and that they are planning on bringing it back to both the wider school building committee and the full district school committee for agreement on that. So it definitely is still a possibility, is a live option.
Okay. I had Tom introduce himself, but I didn't have the rest of us introduce ourselves to Tom. So why don't you go around the room and say how long you've been on this committee. Start with you, John.
I, like you, served on the Finance Committee in the 80s from 82 to 85, and back now.
This is the 20th year on the Finance Committee, and as I told you when we shook hands, when you were on the Finance Committee before, I was on the School Committee for many years before that as well.
Roland Borden, I've been on for, I think, 3 or 4 years now. Kind of losing track of time.
Seems like fun.
Well, with all the other, I was on planning board before and chair CPC for 2 years, so done some other things with that, so.
Hi, Christy Anderson. I've been in town for a little over 10 years now, and this is my, I believe, 4th meeting.
Mike Majors. I've been on the committee 4 or 5 years, something like that, I think. I've been in town since, in Acton since '83, and 5 years in Boxborough before that.
I never knew that. Jason?
Jason Cole, I've been on this is my 3rd year on the committee. I've been in town almost 10 years. In fact, our 10th anniversary is coming up, and 2 boys in the elementary school system.
Hi, I'm Dave Willinghoff. I've been on the committee the same as Jason. This is my 3rd year, and I've been in town almost 9 years. And just to confirm your last name spelling, F-A-R-L-E-Y.
Can you tell us the clerk?
Greetings, I'm Jeff Burgart. Moved to town in '78. Mackenzie put me on the committee in '79, and I'm back just recently for a second bit of energy.
Thanks. I've been in Acton for 9 years now. I have 3 kids in the school system, and I've been on the committee for a few months now.
Thank you.
You ready, Jason?
Sure.
You don't have a screen.
Put on the screen. So I had made some minor tweaks, but we'll just go with what was printed.
Okay.
Okay, so I have some of your feedback. Of course, all of it was individual and independent or grabbed in the hall so as not to be in violation of open meeting law.
Good to know.
Do have a couple of points that have been made on slide. Oh, let me get properly set up here. Okay, on slide 3, it has been recommended that I add the word income between demographic and indicators so as not to be amorphous in what kind of indicators we're talking about. Also, it's been recommended that I change the word from people to residents and businesses, which I also think is perfectly fine. The first sub-bullet, means we can borrow, has been amended to say allows the town to borrow at the cheapest possible rates. There's been a move to strike the absolute bottom line, but I did not take them up on that. I'd like to keep it in unless I get shouted down here. Anyone want to shout me down? I will not out the person who said they wanted me to change that, but good to know. I'm actually missing one set of inputs. Hang on just a second. I've got to change my email here slightly. There we go. And let's open that too. Okay. Okay. Let's see. Of course.
For anyone out there who's listening, can you review the point of this presentation and who the audience is?
Oh, sure. We can start at the beginning. So this is one of the two deliverables we have for the point of view from the Finance Committee. This particular document is the PowerPoint that we plan on using as part of our outreach committee. This is what we will take to each of the PTSOs, the Council on Aging, and anyone else we can Shanghai into a room and make listen to us for half an hour. The purpose of this document is to make sure that we are all in general agreement on which direction we want to row the boat, so to speak, and also to make sure that we have something that we can refer to when in communication with the Board of Selectmen and the school committee and anyone else, and also to refer back to when we go through the ALG process as well. There is a separate deliverable, which is meant to be a summary of this, which is more print-friendly for sending to the Beacon and for printing in the town warrant, I believe. Yes, for printing in the town warrant, because 20-some-odd slides would get us yelled at in the town warrant. Does that address your concern?
I just want to clarify, this is to be received by, or listened to by normal people, not people who are particularly savvy in finance, correct?
All the sharp, smart, intelligent citizenry of Acton.
Yes.
But we include the Board of Selectmen and School Committee as our principal audience, so.
You're going to get me in trouble, you know that? Okay. Yes?
You mentioned earlier that last sub-paragraph thing about we're an affluent town. Does that not give the impression that we're making a value judgment about how much above averages makes us a certain situation compared to others? I mean, I'd like our point of view to be kind of, I'm not saying opinion neutral, but kind of neutral relative to taking sides as to whether we can afford things or not afford things and of that nature. And the word affluent kind of just hit me as being perhaps a little bit outside of what I'd want to say in our point of view. Although it does say we're well above the average, and let that stand as a standalone.
It also comes into play when we get into things like MSBA reimbursement, because we're explicitly in the bucket of affluent towns as per the reimbursement rate that we get from the MSBA. So I'm trying to lay the groundwork for, don't be surprised if you hear that from outside independent agencies when we talk about our finances.
That's fine, and they may even use the word affluent, but the criteria is mean income above a certain amount. So if you're in that particular sheet, you would say, since our mean income is above that amount, the reimbursement is only X percent.
Okay, I got two people that want this pulled. Am I make that three?
Well, I have a comment. It's affluent when compared to what or who. Also, we're also in the Minuteman region, and by that criteria, we're not as affluent as other towns, because we get actually a break in our rate because of the affluency. So it could be, a relative term. It depends on, who you're comparing yourself to. The rest of the state, their neighboring towns, or the county, whatever. So it might require some either explanation or I think it might just be a little bit too subjective.
Okay, I got 4 votes for kill it.
The slide is too busy.
Okay, we'll pull that bottom line.
Well, let's hope it's true, because the last time I checked, we had about the 14th or 15th highest single or tax rate. 16th highest tax rate in the state, so we better be affluent.
16th, it's right there on the front page.
Are these fonts consistent?
Yes, they are. At least they're supposed to be. I'll double check it. Okay, moving right along. Slide 4, and again, I've got multiple sheets of paper that I'm juggling here. Slide 4, we did find, thank you, Christy, we did find median family income and median family owner-occupied housing. The trick with this, and I did footnote it, this is based off of factfinder.census.gov, and these are not hard measured numbers. These are estimates based on the 2010 census data and what the federal government expects us to be at. So these are not hard numbers. So I don't know if that changes people's opinions of this, but in an apples to apples comparison, I literally just updated these 3 bullet points from last year's slide. So if people are looking for consistency from last year's point of view, this is where the data came from, and this is the turn the crank to make sure that the data is consistent. Let's see if
Well, you won't get any more hard data until 2020, so.
Yep, I hear you.
I'm not going to wait for that, so.
Okay. Yes.
There's a question on just because of the engineer in me. By putting it down to the dollar, it sort of infers that it's accurate to the dollar, as opposed to if it really, in fact, is rough estimate, would it be better to say is about 152,000 and the other 109 or 10,000, just to give the sense that it's a rough number as opposed to.
I'd rather footnote it and maybe let people know where I got the data so they can double check for themselves.
Sounds okay.
Okay, slide 5. I have decided to make some changes to this slide. First of all, got a very good suggestion that the third graph, the bottom left graph, is, one of these things is not like the other one. It's not based on the family value, it's based on an individual value. So the recommendation was to pull that graph and to put in some information about median family income. I am looking for some guidance from the committee on this, because I have 2 separate potentially valuable data points in this. The first of which is if you take the 2010, and these are all hard value numbers, if you take 2010 and compare it to 2015, which is the last year that we have hard value for, The median family, let me make sure I get my words right. The median family income has increased on average 1.8% per year. Now, here's where it gets tricky. Since that is not as many data points, or that does not go as far back as the other information, the other two data points I used from 2006. So if you tried to go farther back, the only next hard data point I have is 2000. And if you do the average income from 2000, that actually jumps up to 4.1% on average. Now these are two perfectly accurate data points that can tell a very different story. 4.1 compared to 3.44, leaves a very different feel in people's mind than 1.8 compared to 3.44. So, a wise man told me, use both data points, tag them, and let everyone argue over which data point they care best. If he'd care to add himself, he can do that. If not, I will open up the floor to the committee to tell me if they want to fight for one over the other, or if they're fine with leaving both hard data points in place.
I'd leave them both in place.
Any objections to using both data points? And so the plan is to pull the bottom left graph and add 2 more bullet points. Remove the per capita income has increased average of 1.1 per year data point, and replace it with 2 data points describing median family income on average from 2010 to 2015 and 2000 to 2015.
With Dave on that. I think it should be, I'd go with 2010.
Okay, so just the one data point.
You can just put a bullet that says median household income has grown at whatever the number was, 1.1%.
1.8.
2010 to 2016
Okay.
or something.
And then asterisk say that we don't have 2006 to 2016 data.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't we don't, I mean, if you want, it's just context around what's been going on. You can see it in the charts.
Well, but the context, I'd love to know what that 2006 number is, because 2006, obviously we all know what happened in September 2008, but this could be a very different thing if you actually have 10 years of data to compare it against. So yes, like I said, I was in the conundrum about going back to 2000 because there was some rip-roaring times, 2000 and 2008. So that is also a skewed number. So I just don't know which skew we want to put down. For the record, he said he wouldn't go back that far.
Mike has gone. Yeah, I still recommend consolidating at least 2 of the charts, the average single-family tax bill, and map it against the average single-family value. That really would show sort of disconnect how our tax bill is really climbing much more rapidly than our home value. I think that would be a message right there.
There was also a suggestion, and I will throw it out there for the committee to talk about, to split out the growth in tax rate from the municipal side versus the school side, and to put each of those as independent data points.
In a graph? In a chart?
On the chart.
I think that'd be interesting to see. I mean, I think for the average citizen, looking at this, seeing something like that, I don't know, kind of drive it home. But
There's a slide later on, 2010 to 15 compensation growth. I mean, I get the point, but you don't want to point fingers in this slide and say, oh, our tax rate's gone up, our tax has gone up this much, and this is why.
I'm sympathetic that I'm very afraid of an us versus them devolution if we do that. But that's why it was suggested to me, so I bring it to the committee.
Points made later, I think.
I think to be open and explain something, if it is in fact going up at a rate which is high compared to some other rates, and I'm not value judging, but high compared to other things, and if we find that it is based on two different rates going at very different increments, that we should be open and just say that's what it is, with no value judgment, and let each organization describe why that's happening, and the town should be mature enough to know that that makes sense and we understand it. And part of it could simply be, and I'm conjecturing, if the school's rate is higher, maybe there were more kids, more students, and clearly that would drive spending going up at a high rate. I think it's our job to just break out any major differences and let people see the differences and discuss it.
Well, I think it's very careless to put in charts without a context. I'm glad to see that the chart with property tax rates for a whole host of towns, has been taken out, because as a standalone, you've really got to give it context, you've got to put what is the median home price home value next to it. So I think it's a very divisive thing. People are going to look at it and say, well, why? You see how much we spend on the schools. Why do we have to continue to support that? I mean, there's reasons why the schools costs increase faster and in a greater amount over time than the town side does. And if you're going to do something like that, you really better set out the reasons for it, because I think it's a very divisive formulation to do it the other way and let them figure it out. Well, they'll figure it out, and they'll say it's spending too much on schools.
Well, whether you're the town or the schools, you're in a people business, and the proportion of people costs in the school budget is higher than the proportion of people costs in the town budget. So there's always going to be a tendency to look like we're spending proportionately more
and today's
on the schools.
Sorry.
Okay.
Today's point, I do think we do call that out 3 slides from now when we specifically talk about the compensation growth. So I think I'd rather not do it in both places. I'd rather leave this one consolidated and then let people look at the compensation growth and split up from municipal versus school and seize upon that if they so desire.
Yeah, that's fine.
General agreement?
Yeah, I was going to offer another suggestion to Mike's earlier point of, superimposing the top 2 graphs on each other. Might it make sense to do the calculation of the average single-family tax bill as a percent of the average single-family value? I know that's not assessed value, which would be the rate people are more familiar with, but it would give probably a more economic feel to the tax bill as a percent of your value. I think that would be somewhat dramatic.
Say it again, average single family.
Tax bill in dollars as a percent of the average single family value.
That's what he
was suggesting superimposing the 2 on the same graph. I'm suggesting maybe do the calculation and say what the percent is.
Percent change over the last.
The actual percent dollars, the actual percentage.
Or that could be a third line.
Right. Or a data point just put on there.
Yep, okay. Got that suggestion too.
Jason, I have one more thing that's bugs me a little about this in the previous slide. The economic indicators we give are based on median, and then in these slides we talk about average. It's not a huge difference, but having looked at the revenue census numbers, they are different.
They're actually very different. I think the median is a much more valuable indicator. That's why when I went to when we were looking at the family income, I did go to median. I don't know if I have median single-family tax bill and median single-family value. I can double check if that's.
I believe the median single-family value is on the census site.
Okay, I don't like the census stuff because it's estimates based off of 2010 census, whereas these numbers are hard numbers out of DOR. So I hear what you're saying about mixing mean and median on the same slide, but I don't think I have much option here.
Yeah, Christy, the federal government loves medians and the state government only talks averages. So don't know why that is, but we can get average single-family tax bills and average single-family values going back to 1950 from the states, and it's hard data, but you can't find median equivalents anywhere.
It could be like Lake Wobegon, above average.
I'll leave that be. Okay, moving on. I do have some suggestions for making these transition slides cleaner and stronger. I will take that into account and try and clean it up for us. I have a request. I have multiple requests on slide 7. On slide 7, I have a request to add a concern about affordability, and I have a request to add a concern about too frequent tax increases greater than 2.5%. I ask if it's possible to combine those into a single line, and or sort of the flow of this document has been for everything that we have a concern on, we have at least one follow-up slide. What would you all want me to put on the affordability / tax increase greater than 2.5% for last X number of years running as the meat slide rather than just the top line slide?
Sure, Jason. What dawned on me yesterday was we have the median income and we have the median tax. Affordability kind of feels to me like what percentage of our median income are we spending on town taxes? And so if you looked at a graph or a trend on that, and if that trend was increasing, then you might imply that the strain on our income affordability is getting harder. And if it were going down, then you would perhaps conclude that it is becoming more affordable to pay taxes in the town. So I don't know if that resonates with people, but that sort of hit me as being possibility of an affordability metric. And then when we talk about our issue of how do we compare ourselves with other towns, maybe we could do that same ratio for all the other towns, and perhaps their percentages are lower because their median incomes are substantially higher, and therefore as a percentage of their income it's less, and they can afford to charge more for the various services that they provide.
I think when you get into that when you look in other towns, you have to be very careful because they might have a different commercial base than what we have here in Acton. 87% of the tax burden is paid by the citizens, not businesses in town. And if you go over to Concord, maybe that's 80%, or even other communities, comparable communities where they have a larger commercial base, and thus their citizens are paying less. So, I mean, you're kind of not comparing apples and apples because commercial property varies from town to town, and that has a big impact on how much the actual citizens are paying compared to corporations are paying to the town.
I think if the data actually show that our citizens are paying a greater and greater percentage of their median income on taxes, that would be interesting. The comparative to other towns, like Roland said, well, one, you've got a different commercial tax base. You also have different levels of services being provided by the town, so you're not really looking at an apples-to-apples comparison. They may pick up the trash, they may do other things for those dollars of taxes that we don't. So, but I would like to see the data.
You know, just another different way of looking at it would be, you could just approach it from a demand perspective, and we talk a lot about there's an increasing demand for more affordable housing, is instead of getting too much into the data, which is probably very interesting, but as we said, could be difficult to tease out what you're actually looking for. You could just say demand for affordable housing continues to increase, and reflective of, you know, high property values and high tax rates or something like that, and then you don't need to get bogged down in as much of the data, which is interesting, but might be a bit overwhelming for this presentation. But I defer to your expertise.
I'm thinking of kicking until next year, but that's okay.
And then just, you know, the other one on the tax increases. If you have information about what percentage, what amount of the last 5 or 10 tax increases were at the maximum allowed, that would be interesting. And there'd be probably a simple data point Brian could provide is, you know, 8 of the last 10 were at the maximum allowed rate, and that's a concern in town. Another simple thing that might grab people's attention.
Yeah, we can ask Brian for the data. My recollection is there would probably be just as many when we went under the 2.5 as went over. Just the ones that we went over, the 2.5 are more recent than the ones when we went under. So if you go back far enough, it probably balances out. But yeah, we can ask Brian to pull the data together.
On the compensation growth slide, I would start off with a bullet of what percentage of the budget is compensation. And then to Steve's point is you could have it say something to the effect of, you know, in the school system it's X of the budget, in town it's Y, or whatever the numbers are, just for background.
So where do I get that number? I tried looking at the annual town report, and it would be, no.
What are you looking for?
The percentage of the school budget that is compensation, the percentage of the municipal budget that is compensation. The only thing I saw is the summary of salaries and fringes. I could add up the 20 lines for the school. That's relatively easy. But on the municipal side, it's embedded in every single different department, and I have to pull that out for every single different department.
No, we have the so-called 26-liner that summarizes it. I can get it for you.
For the last 10 years?
The last 10 years.
Or tell me where to find it.
I might be able to get that. I've been yelling at them to get that pulled together for at least 10 years. Whether I still have all the data, that's another question.
Okay, so we're on to slide 7. Sorry, we're on slide 8 now. And looking through all of my notes. One person objected to just the term compensation growth altogether. Any objection to changing to salary and fringe?
It's got healthcare in it too, so general definition of compensation would include salaries and fringes, healthcare, pension.
Okay, so good.
Yeah.
I'm not going to make a change on that one then. We'll shoot that one down. Slide 8.
I think I've got a typo on that one too. At the end of the paragraph, it speaks about cover this rate or increase. Should that be rate of increase?
Probably. Yep. Somebody else picked up on that typo too. Thank you. Okay. So slide 9, the compensation growth slide. I have not updated this yet because I couldn't find the data, but now apparently I need to look for the 26-liner. And Steve, you're going to get voluntold on that one too. Let's see. Number 10.
Did you want to separate out school and town here?
I think we did.
The magnitude is, but not the rate.
I'd like to see the rate of growth separated out, just to make it harder for you.
Fine. Rate of growth as a bullet point underneath. The percentage, average percentage over 5 years, 6 years.
Third axis.
So anyway, folks, I am taking notes of who's commenting on this, and if it gets to be more than a one-person job, I'm going to form a subcommittee to assist Jason in this task. So.
For the record, I have been shopping this around. You did.
It may go without saying, but should we put a label under the third set of bars?
Yep. Yep. Okay, where am I? Slide 10. Slide 10.
But Jason, on the compensation growth 2010 to 2015, part of that school will reflect the fact that we're paying a greater percentage of the ABRS budget, the way you've constructed it, so that overemphasizes the rate at which compensation has grown in the schools.
Say that again?
You've calculated, as you say, that Acton's percentage of ABRS. Our percentage of the total school budget has grown because of demographic factors. Therefore, part of the it's not the compensation increase of the school system as a whole that you're measuring there. You're measuring the compensation that we're paying for, and that's a greater percentage. You probably should just take the compensation growth as a percentage of the total budget in ABRS and not just based on Acton's percentage.
That would, however, mean that that is not reflective of what the Acton taxpayer is covering.
But
it's complicated.
What are you trying to tell people? That we're paying a greater percentage of the school budget, or the rate of increase in compensation to the school? I would be willing to bet you that 99% of the people in Acton believe that that's the rate at which compensation has grown in the school system as a whole.
I see. Everyone in agreement that it should be the overall school rate, not the Acton share rate? Okay. Okay. Slide 10, capital projects. One recommendation was to put each of these bullet points on their own slide. I understand the don't make the slides too busy, but I'm also of a mind of I don't want to have a 50-slide presentation here. One slide or 3 slides?
One.
Fewer words on one slide.
Cool. Fewer words. I'll try it.
That might be kind of hard on that one.
How he can do it.
Okay, next slide. School capital needs. So this has come up. You're not the first person to say that. The reason why I said valuable solution is because I was trying to get across the concept of most cost effective, the most efficient use of funds, most bang for the buck, the best return on the investment. What I don't want to do is I don't want to invest in schools. I don't want to invest in a school that is not going to last more than 5 to 10 years. I'd rather, I don't want to put a new muffler on a car where the engine's about to die. I'd rather buy a new car. So the thought process on that is, perhaps most efficient, most effective.
Effective and efficient as a parent.
This is your opinion, right? This isn't the group's opinions.
Well, I get to put it down on paper, and you get to disagree with me if you don't want it as part of the POV.
It'll be our opinion.
So if you don't like this bullet, speak now.
Well, why say this at all? Just say something generic, but a potential solution would be a mix of new construction as well as repairs and renovations to existing buildings. Why have an opinion on it? Just
because I do want to drive home that I don't want to throw good money after bad on buildings that will not have a long enough time horizon, a long enough lifespan. So I'm trying to be a little more blunt about it.
So would it another phrase be, the goal is to find the right mix of new construction and repair to obtain the best value for our money, or something like that? As opposed to...
My point is more just, we haven't really debated this internally, and it's obviously a huge project, so this opinion would be not necessarily, not my opinion at this point, because I'm not educated on the matter.
Okay. Find the right mix of new construction as well as repairs and renovations to remaining buildings. And then we don't have to come up with efficient and effective at all.
At the end of the day, we're going to take a vote on this, but you're not going to be able to vote on every slide. You're going to be able to vote on the point of view, so I don't mind taking straw votes on
No,
I'm not done yet. I got 16 million changes to make.
Jason, just to comment on formatting, in the first dash, we spell out the word million. In the second dash, we use 100M.
Got it.
In my line of business, M is thousands, so 2 M's is million. It's a weird business.
And you use MN. Dave, you use MN everywhere.
I use MN, but MM is
Yeah, M&M's are candy, guys. Let's spell out the words.
spell out million.
Okay.
Throughout.
Okay. Okay. Next slide. So once we beat up on the schools, we beat up on the town. Recommendation is I pull this slide pull the line about the library altogether. That's sour grapes on something that didn't make it into the initial report, although I kind of want to drive home the point that even if we think we've got a full handle on things, there can be substantial and impactful oopses.
So the library, that last comment's going to be pulled?
That's the recommendation, although I like it, that's why I put it in. So
I kind of like it in a way because it says, hey, you may look at the building and may go, hey, it looks great, why do we need to do anything? Well, reality is the roof's leaking. It hasn't been repaired yet. We've had a lot of rain this spring and summer, and I imagine it's still leaking. So I mean, it's one of the point that our infrastructure needs to be maintained.
I'd drop it.
Having just found out that I need a new roof, I'm really happy that I have my savings to cover it. So I think it points towards what we're going to discuss later on about reserve policy and potential use for what we have there. So
we're 3 and 3 for drop and for keep. Who else wants to weigh in?
You get to be a deciding vote here, folks. It's tied at the moment. Not everybody's voted.
Got 3 and 3 with 5 people who've not been heard from.
Library should not be capitalized.
Choose your friend.
Great job dodging. Great job dodging the question there. Okay. We'll fight about that one again later. Okay, land purchases. Somebody. I gotta add the word project or property after the word River Street, so are we not suggesting that we move all of River Street to CPA?
Just all River Street properties.
Oh, God.
Everybody's a critic, you know?
Move. Okay, so much for the fewer words on the page. Request to DOS to move recently acquired River Street property, or what? Does anyone know the number on River Street off the top of their head? I'll look it up. Number. Okay. Number makes sense. Okay. Let's see, let me look at the other comments that I've received. And again, I apologize for only getting it out yesterday. So I have not had a chance to incorporate people's input since then. Okay, anyone else want to say anything else about this slide? Moving right along. Slide, Finance Committee Reserve Policy. Let me be very clear. I farmed this out thoroughly. Thank you, Christy, for taking the previous slide and cutting it into these two slides without changing the meaning, since this was the part of last year's point of view that I had the hardest time swallowing. I did farm this out to someone else so as not to be guilty of putting my bias in here in any way, shape, or form. Do have a suggestion to change where it says 2.7 million at current spending, or of current spending. Of current spending level.
Jason, can I ask a question?
Yep.
I read the footnote you had, and I still don't understand what these metrics are that we're using, why we have a lower threshold based on municipal spending versus an upper threshold based on total Acton spending. I was hoping someone could
You didn't like
explain
my long screen answer?
I didn't quite understand it all.
Oh. Okay. Anyone else want to jump in on why we came to the compromise of not just using municipal side spending or total school side spending, why we decided to pick one from the municipal side and one from the school side?
Actually, to clarify, I think it is confusing for someone looking at this who doesn't want to have to think too hard about it. This is where my eyes would start to glaze over if this was a presentation being given to me.
Well, where it comes from is we're the Acton Finance Committee, so technically we're talking about town reserves, and town reserves apply to town spending. However, we are also responsible to pay an assessment from the schools, which kind of is twice the size of the town spending. So to merely say we want to have reserves that are some percentage of our town spending doesn't really cover us in the event that school assessments require reserves. So we try to set an upper and a lower threshold that included both the specific municipal spending plus recognize the fact that that's not the only thing that we have to tax for. Jeff?
I haven't gone through your bringing up to speed program yet. So is it fair to say, though, that the school has its own reserve fund?
Yeah, it's called excess and deficiencies. They're capped at 5%. If they go over 5%, they have to return the monies to the towns. They've not been in jeopardy of hitting that cap recently. And a couple of years ago, they were actually put on negative watch from Moody's. So that's.
Well, so I'm sort of comparing apples and oranges. So would it make more sense to have total spending compared against total reserves, which would include the sum of the two reserves. So, and maybe, I know we're separate organizations and that, but doesn't that then say we're in the same boat? Meaning that, you know, both the town and the school has obligations to try and put away if they have good things and come back with, and use when they have a tough year, and so this, I don't know.
The reason the total spending number is lower than the municipal side spending is we recognize they do have their own set of reserves. And at the time, I think we wrote this, it was probably around 2%, so that we were basically saying a similar thing. We really don't have that much influence over the Acton-Boxborough Regional School Committee in terms of what they do with their E&D. They are able to do whatever they please. We try and confine our reserves to what we know the municipal side should have and something to cover us in case they decide to fund some capital spending and just run it through their assessment as opposed to using their own reserves. So yeah, it gets a little complicated. It'd probably be easier to say 5% of everything, but then you have to say, well, but then you have to subtract out what their E&D is from that number, and we just obviously didn't quite hit the nail on the head. But last year we said, well, this is a way to say it. It may be more complicated than it needs to be. But the point we were trying to make was we need to be prepared to cover not only the town side problems, but the school side problems as well.
I only ask because it's sort of like the ALG is addressing the cooperation on the spending side. And I wondered if they could address the cooperation on the reserve side as well.
But we also have no control over Boxborough, so we have no idea, we have no control over Boxborough Town reserves and whether or not they're willing to spend their reserves for the school in the same proportion as would be required. So there's only so much cooperation that we can extend.
I mean, the school reps, school committee reps on ALG are Acton people, not necessarily AB people.
Although I think the point stands is a little bit of explanation about the upper and lower bounds might be helpful in the center part of the slide or wherever on the slide, just because people will have the questions of how are these numbers arrived at. Very tightly and concisely worded.
Yeah, so much for the less words.
You could draw a picture.
Okay, also have a suggestion to change where it says sources of revenue that cannot legally be budgeted to sources of revenues that cannot legally be forecasted, such as excise tax.
Okay.
I think you could make it clear that a significant portion of the replenishment funds are just actual revenues that exceed the projections. And can we just say it that way?
No.
Why?
Because I don't want to get into the whole, I mean, talk about a rat hole on a slide. Getting into replenishment, that I don't think there's, we don't even have a solid understanding amongst ourselves. How are we going to impart that to the school PTSOs?
Oh, it's really, I mean, we went through that, you know, this time last year when we took a look at, how the reserves were accumulated. And there was a 10-year run when the conservative budget projections were exceeded by the actual revenues, and that's really a very significant source, you know, of the replenishment. So I think you could just add a instead of sources of revenue that cannot be legally budgeted, just say actual revenues which exceeded projections.
Anybody else?
Is that the only source, or could it also be expenditures?
Underspending would be the other.
Yeah.
Turnbacks. You know, that would be the first one, unused budgeted monies. That's what they commonly call turnbacks. And then what we learned in the exercise last summer was they budget in the fall, for a year hence, and the conservative forecasts are exceeded by actual revenue. It won't necessarily go on forever, but that's a significant source of it.
Go with it.
Say it again.
Or send it to them in writing.
Say it again. Okay. Actual revenues exceed revenue projections.
Such as excise, or just leave it at?
Anything.
Don't get specific. Yeah.
Don't get specific? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it could be,
Okay.
just tax, just real estate tax revenues.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
We could say, instead of unused budgeted money, unused budgeted expenses.
I'm fine with that. Okay. Slide 16, the policy outcomes.
When we, I guess it was the third bullet, balance the focus on municipal versus school budgets. Are we talking about here how we plug budget shortfalls?
I have no idea. This is literally just pulling the data from last year. And again, since this was my least favorite part of it, I was purposely not touching this.
Okay. Fair enough.
But you could, if you want it pulled, now's the time to.
No, go ahead. No,
Now's the
go
time
ahead.
to
No, go ahead.
suggest it,
I'm not objecting to it.
Because I don't know what it means either. So.
If we don't know what it means, why have it in there? We have to explain this to the PTSOs.
Good point.
Is the purpose of the bullet that we're trying to balance the competing requests for the creative tension and or whatever you will between municipal and school? In other words, even though we don't have the power to make it happen, the Acton Leadership Group is trying to look at two honest, good groups that want more money, and they've got to somehow work to balance that.
I think that's core to everything we do, and that it should not be specific to a reserve slide. I think that's core of it to everything.
Well, that's what I got from here when the word focus is not perhaps what it means, but when I heard that balance, what resonated to me was competing requests, and they're all very good, and how do we balance those?
Permission to pull it?
Yeah, pull it.
Yeah. Jason, to bullet 4, which I guess will become bullet 3, where we say encourage spending down the town's reserves for one-time items such as capital or other town priorities, or refund them to taxpayers. We have been following a practice of using the reserves to plug operational, budget shortfalls, which I think is a very wise thing to do. But I think we should probably mention that in this bullet.
No, I am in disagreement. I do not feel that we should be using reserves for plugging operational expenses at all.
Okay, that's your point of view. How about let's talk about the committee, because as a matter of practice, we've been doing that. And if we choose not to do that, we could direct the discussion about what gets cut. We could go on the school side and say each of the elementary schools cut $100,000. Tell us what you want to cut because we're going to sit on $8 million of reserves. I think we'll have a riot on our hands. But I think we have to flag that issue here because that's the practice that we've been doing.
So one of the points that we are trying to drive through this point of view is actually that we do not want to have any more reserves than we feel that is appropriate and prudent to have. And anything that we do have, any monies that are not within that guide range of the upper and lower threshold for reserves should first and foremost be spent on one-time capital items and not on recurring expected operating expenditures. So I'm happy to have that conversation now, but to your point about this is my opinion, yes, this is absolutely my opinion, but I thought it was the consensus of the board that we had agreed last year that any excess monies that were outside of the reserve policy should first and foremost be spent on one-time capital items, and that we would much prefer to see the towns and the schools operate without having to use reserve monies, because it only takes 1 or 2 years of there being an unexpected level of happy turnbacks for us to find ourselves behind the 8 ball. For example, if, we're going to have a conversation sometime soon about union contracts, right? So if we decide to start using the reserves that we have, which are great, go us, thank God we have these reserves. If we start using the reserves and start having rapidly expanding compensation growth, what are you going to do with that built-in, baked-in, you've now got a head count that is expected to come back next year? I don't want to find us in a situation where the first year that we don't have reserves, we have to resort to firing people. I would much prefer we live within our means and not use reserves for operating expenses. I had another point on that. But yes, no, it was my expectation that we were going to request of both the Board of Selectmen and the ABRSD for what, that's the other point. It is my opinion, and I would actively ask for feedback, that we have not done right by the towns, by the town, by allowing the buildings in both on the municipal side and on the school side to get to this state. I believe that Douglas should have been fixed or replaced years ago. But because we find ourselves now with a massive capital risk, massive capital shortfall, 120 on the school side, 16 on the town side, that came about by not doing a good enough job of taking care of the buildings. So what I definitely don't want to do is give away all of our reserves for operating expenses and continue to let the capital problems lie fallow. So no, I strongly object to suggesting we take our reserves and say, well, since we've used $1.6 to $2 million a year for the last 5 years in reserves as part of the operating expense, that we should just keep on doing that. No, I disagree.
Well, we obviously don't have enough money to do everything.
Agreed.
To fund operational expenses at the level we're accustomed to and we need, and that's all at the cost of capital work that needs to be done, maintaining, our capital infrastructure. That's the easiest thing to gloss over from year to year. We can do this, we can look the other way. They all need to be addressed. I mean, we've done the management on both sides has done a remarkable job. The last time we've had a series of overrides was in 2003 and 2005, and that followed on to about 13 years of no overrides. So, managing money, I think we've done a real good job at without having to come back to the taxpayers. But I think the reality of the situation is we need those reserves to fund the operational sides of both school and town. And if you don't want to do that, then you could have a great discussion at your ALG about what do you guys want to cut? How large of classes do you want to have? How many teachers do you want to get rid of? Because that's where the bucks are. And I don't think that's a discussion we want. I don't think we're serving the town well in that regard. It's just a question, there's not enough money to do everything that we'd really like to do. You know, I was, you know, as it came back last year, we had agreed to spend, I think it was 1.6 of reserves to plug shortfalls, and then at the end it was about 2.4 or 2.5, and some people were a little frustrated. Why didn't we hold the line? You know, you had to do it. I mean, that's where the costs were. So I think we've really got to get real about that first and foremost. But we need a real good discussion on this as to, you know, where we really stand. I'm particularly interested come late September when we get the final report, the certification of our free cash, and see what sort of replenishment we, you know, come in year end, you know, that the reserves are still in pretty good shape.
Other comments? We've got two guys who getting pretty good debate going here. Somebody want to jump in?
Come on. I mean, these are the hard questions.
The water's fine.
You know, I would say this is, in the Finance Committee, obviously we're just making recommendations, and this reserve policy is a recommendation for the town to follow. So making a recommendation that they continue to plug operating deficits with reserve use doesn't seem like a prudent thing to do from my perspective. Similarly, we've raised taxes, you know, let's say 2 to 2.5% the last several years to say that that's how we've done it. We want to continue, the Finance Committee recommends continuing to do that because that's how we've done it. Doesn't seem prudent as well. I think you could just simplify this bullet as, you know, and we have discussed this pretty extensively last year in particular, but the year prior as well, as, you know, priorities that the Finance Committee has discussed would be using reserve funds to plug near-term capital needs. And then my opinion is leaving out the operating part of it, because if I remember 2 years ago, we had discussed that specifically, and we don't want to say, well, deficits are fine, run whatever you want, because that's how you've always done business. So they need to balance their budget one way or the other, and that's their business to do, is my opinion. But I think we had discussed this as a group several times.
Yeah, I would agree with Jason and Dave that, you know, the purpose of reserve is not to fund operational deficits. At least the intent is not to. The intent is not to have operational deficits, but our reserve policy really is focused on short-term capital needs and just more of a rainy day reserve, you know, in the true sense of the word. As Dave said, it should not be used, it wouldn't be prudent to use reserves, at least have a policy of using reserves to plug operational deficits.
The rainy day fund would be worth, you know, rainy day money in the case of an economic downturn or whatever the case may be. That's not really listed there.
Wait a minute, Christy, you, no? Okay.
That also came up recently with the state, that their rainy day fund is down because they've been using it to plug their deficits. And the credit agencies are getting on them about that they don't have enough in reserves.
Moody's put the school system on negative outlook for using reserves to plug operating
because they have no
deficits
reserves,
on a recurring
correct.
basis.
So, and that was one of them that they, and Moody's, I believe, specifically said that they shouldn't be using that to plug operating deficits, to plug operational gaps.
Other comments? Would it help if we just changed the bullet to encourage spending the town's reserves for one-time items such as capital?
Yeah.
I mean,
Or perhaps just say, as for one-time items or other town priorities. That, you know, town
Yeah.
priorities could be budget shortfalls, or the town priorities could be refund them to taxpayers, but maybe, and just take out the last phrase, or refund them to taxpayers.
Well, then just say encourage spending down the town reserves if it includes almost everything except refunding them to taxpayers. Because, I mean, it's one time, I mean, that's an all-inclusive definition, is just spend down the reserves. And we should have a more narrow use of it. But I would recommend rainy day fund being, you know, higher up on the list. Is the point of having the reserves is to balance out the cycle and whatever else.
I'll weigh in. I don't like the expression spending down. I think the reserve is the word reserve. It's for, you know, the reserves funds, in my opinion, should be for one-time capital needs and emergency spending situations. I mean, that's what a reserve fund typically is in this context.
Yeah, we did have actually that part of the discussion last year in the library when we talked about these one-time capital needs from the consultant studies. And to your point, I had exactly the same concern. This reads as spend down the money at all costs, you know, whatever the need. When, you know, you might say something like consider using town reserves for one-time items. But again, why maybe even strip the bullet then? What point is that?
Okay, so what I've got down now for this last bullet is encourage only using town's reserves for one-time items such as capital and true emergency events.
You can drop true. Emergency is an emergency. And John, that may include operating deficits.
Well, I would like to hear from the school parents, because, that would, the business of this town or those schools, and it's also, as Jason would maintain, maintaining the physical structure, but it's also maintaining the quality of the education. And,
So to that end, as a parent of two school-aged boys, my opinion is that I believe that the priorities have been out of whack for 2 decades now. I believe that we have fantastic school programs and excellent teachers, and God bless their MCAS scores and all the rest of that fun stuff. And I am not detracting from the bang for the buck that we get from our teachers and administrators. But the priority has not been the state of the physical plant is atrocious to me. And given that we do have limited resources, and we cannot and we should not be looking at 5, 6, 7, 8% year over year tax increases, I believe that we should need to tip the balance towards cleaning up some of our capital problems. Now, if that means forecasting out that it's time to start staying a little more careful in the growth rate on some of the non-capital expense side, now's the time to start. And yes, I do have 2 kids in the school district. And no, I don't want terrible things to happen to our school, to our schooling system. But I think that for too long, given that we cannot tax to everyone's heart's content, that maybe we really do need to start saying, if you have money, that it needs to go to the right priority, which, and we'll see on the very next slide, the recommendations that we're making here is, it's time to fix the capital problem.
Yeah, it's not so much an issue today, but for years, recent past, our reserves have really been growing and growing to a very high level. And by definition, those high levels of reserves means we were overtaxed to begin with. And I think the person or the group that should be in line to get the benefit of that reserve, or some of that spending down, is the taxpayer. Period.
And so I argue the best way to do that is to solve our biggest risk at this time, which I believe to be a capital issue. So to that end, I would like to jump to the next slide to specifically point out where we were trying to go with these reserves.
Go ahead.
Slide 15, the recommendation for 19. This is just to keep the funding for OPEB. I just pulled that straight forward from last year. That should be a and move on. Near-term capital needs must be addressed and funded from reserves. Last year, I feel we were not as clear as we should and or could have been in our presentation, both to the Board of Selectmen and to the school district and through ALG, that we really did not want reserves to be used for something other than a clear prioritized list of capital needs. Furthermore, I think it would be in everyone's best interest if we have an early identified list of what those capital projects should be, so that as we ring this out through the ALG process and through our 3 separate boards, we can indeed point to tangible results at the end of the fiscal year as to what we as ALG decided were the most important projects and what we were able to solve with the resources that we have.
So let me ask you on this, on your third bullet on recommendations for fiscal 19. It says reserves for FY 18, I suppose it means 19.
Yep, that's right.
Okay.
Sorry.
Only we recommend allocating X million dollars in free cash on budgeted spending. So we're already saying we're going to use free cash for the coming year to plug shortfalls.
Yes, but we don't want it to be part of our policy that every year we will. I mean, I'd love to say no, but I realize that you can't change things on a dime like that. But I would like to start telegraphing, let's not count on reserves to plug operating expense. And I've got nods around the table.
Well, if that's the way you guys want to do it,
Well, the problem, the last ALG plan, as we discussed a couple of meetings ago, had $1.3 million, I think, in each FY19 and FY20, essentially to plug operating deficits. However, in both cases, there were further deficits beyond that. So
I'm sorry?
There were further deficits. We didn't plug the hole. FY19.
So it would be greater than the 1.3
right.
need.
So then the question becomes, how far can you go? And there is a limited number of reserves. Technically, at this time, other than whatever turnbacks come in from the town that would have to be in excess of 900,000, we're starting FY19 with 4.3 million. In reserves. 2 of that is in a stabilization fund. So maybe there's a few 100,000 more in turnbacks coming, and we'll know at some point. But the question is, if we try and throw $2.5 million at the reserves like we did last year, we're going to have to go to town meeting and ask for a 2/3 vote to take money out of a stabilization fund to fund operations. And I'm not sure I like our chances on that. So I think now is the time to send a message. Let's try and keep the reserve use to a minimum. I think we should stand by what we've said in the past about use of 1.3 million. But beyond that, I'm not sure I'm comfortable going to a much higher number.
So you acknowledge that there's a continuing need to use free cash to plug operational budget shortfalls this year, next year, and on out.
I can say I wish it wasn't so, but
the reality is.
The reality is. But the reality is also that we don't have $11 million in reserves anymore. We may enter the year with a bit more than the 4.3, but we don't have enough to plug
But,
To the
but-
extent
And
we have-
I would be perfectly happy if we get to the point where we say you can use 1.3 in reserves with the anticipation of getting 1.3 in turnbacks. And if we come back to more or less all comes out in the wash at the end of the year, yes, I'm fine with it. But no, I'm not okay with you can use $2.5 million a year and hopefully we get $900,000 in turnbacks at the end of any year. Because again, you only have to be wrong 1 or 2 years and then suddenly now we're not saying, hey, tighten up the britches. We're saying we can't do it. Who are you going to fire? I don't want to get to the point of having to fire people.
well, you will.
Well,
If you don't use,
unless you raise taxes.
Unless
You will have two choices at that point. You can fire people or raise taxes.
no. Remember, the business of the town, of those schools, and to those of you who care a lot about the value of your homes, the value of your homes is dependent on how good those schools are. So think hard about that. I mean, if you're talking about building a new twin school, but then you got to provide the money for its operational use. It's nice to have a nice building, but you got to be able to use it.
As a parent with kids in the school right now, I have concerns about the long-term value of the school, because it will matter to my kids going forward whether people know that AB was a good school. And if we're continuing to run a budget that is not sustainable, my understanding is the schools currently are dependent on use of money, as you're saying, from the operating budget to actually work. If that ever stops working, we could start looking at a decline in the value of the schools, having to cut staff, et cetera, which we could plan for now.
Well, you have to look, when you have 2.5, I remember when, during our time on the committee in the 80s, I think we were talking about, now, as a context, there were double-digit interest rates at that time and double-digit inflation. We bought our house in 1981. The interest rate was 16.25%, and it actually went higher. But we were talking back then about overrides every 2 or 3 years to keep this all going, and things have gotten better. We've not had to do that. But really the message in all of this is, public services cost money, and the better the service, the more you have to pay. And there really is a direct relationship between taxes and services, and people like their services. They don't often, I guess as Dory Hunter was fond of saying, someone said to him, a constituent said to him, hey, Dory, I voted for 2.5 to cut my taxes, not my services. People like their services, it's the other guy's service they want cut.
But we're not in the current system showing people that they have to pay for their services. We're counting on reserves and turnbacks to hopefully not have there be too much of a hole where people don't, I think, understand. I read the town warrant every year, and was really confused by the fact that the town budget and the school budget were in the red every year. And I didn't know how that could ever balance out.
Well, no, I think until we dealt with it last year, there was an ongoing thing from year to year on the Finance Committee where here's the chart, we have $10 million in reserves, we're going to spend $2 million, then we're down to $8 million, and we can't sustain this in a couple of years, all our reserves are going to be gone. And they come back the next year, we have $10 million in reserves if we spend $2 million, because it had been replenishing itself. That's what we learned last summer. Now, it's not a guarantee that you can get a full replenishment out of it, but the reserves are in pretty good shape. When you talk about reserves, you're talking about free cash, you're talking about the school's emergency and deficiency, you're talking about what is the third fund that we have?
There's a stabilization fund.
Stabilization fund.
All right, I think we probably beat this one to death.
Steve, just a quick question about the amount of money that would be used. How much capital would be left over for these near-term capital needs given the deficits and the plan that you reviewed a few weeks ago? I think a year ago we discussed $4 million or something along those lines, and I'm sure it's...
Like I said, there was a FY19 in the last ALG plan showed after applying 1.3 million, showed a $2.2 million deficit. which means that would pretty much eat up.
So do we have any excess capital for these near-term capital needs in the first place? So let's
I don't
just
think
strip
so.
these slides and bullets out of this.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
Do we have actual capital to apply, reserves to apply towards these quote-unquote near-term capital needs that we've been discussing?
Not.
I don't recall that in the plan.
Unless we curtail spending in some way that is not anticipated in the current ALG plan.
Because this middle bullet is maybe not relevant.
Well, there's spending for capital out of reserves. There's also bonding is an option.
But we were discussing spending down reserves on near-term capital needs.
So at this point, we're on the recommendation slide. We're not just within the reserve policy use. So we are still requesting of both the selectmen and the schools to have an itemized list of how to get out of our capital deficit. So this is not strictly what to use reserves for.
Okay. So just to be clear, the prior slide that had the encouraged spending downtown reserves,
That was strictly part of the policy.
that was a broad
That was-
recommendation on the reserves policy, but not consistent with where we were, or it's not the same as a year ago because now we don't have those reserves.
Reserve position right now looks a little thin.
Okay. All right. I'm clear.
Do I need to pull?
No, but we did discuss a year ago using reserves for near-term capital needs, and that's not the scenario we're in right now.
Okay, so actually, I see your point. I need to pull the word reserves.
Yeah.
And say near-term
Right.
capital needs must be addressed. Leave the two middle bullet points, and then we have a recommendation on how to use reserves. So I needed to pull the word reserve from that second point. You're absolutely right.
Okay, let's move on.
Okay, slide 18.
Go home tonight.
Slide 18. You knew this was going to happen, Steve. Slide 18, I have the 3.3% increase in red because honestly, it's too early in the cycle for us to have a number that we have settled on. I probably should have left it as XX%, but I left it in last year's number. I just turned it red.
The one thing I would say on that is, since I sent you all the collective bargaining agreements on the teachers, that is running at a more than 4% rate, and the teachers' salaries budget is around $30 million a year. It's going to be pretty hard for the schools So do we change the wording? Do we say if you go over that, you need to identify another source of funds or something like that? Because I think the cows maybe have left the barn on 3.3.
Yeah, I had a question about looking at it from a different perspective. For example, from an affordability perspective, what do we think the median income of the town's going to go up? The median income of the town only goes up 2%. Then why are we setting a 3 or 4% for taxes? Because we have an affordability issue of how are people going to afford these things, and we do have that creative tension. But I think there's a lot of people in town who don't subscribe, John, to the schools at any cost because they don't have kids in the school and they can't afford to live in their homes anymore. And I don't want to drive those people out of town or disenfranchise them. God forbid they all come to a town meeting and vote down the school budget. And then where would we be? So there is that creative tension that we need to respect the rights of other people and how much they can afford. So I just wondered if somehow we could factor into whatever percentage we come up with some notion of affordability and whether that's inflation and how people are getting paid in town.
I wasn't talking about schools at any cost. I mean, it's a very tough balance you have when you're dealing with larger societal issues of an aging population and people outliving their money, and what do you do about that? And those are just, questions that really go beyond us. And the larger social compact you have in these towns that you would have had years when you didn't have kids in the schools, then you were paying for school-age kids, and then there was a large part of your time here when you had kids, and people at both ends were paying for your kids, and now you're paying for kids who are in school today as we are. We're in the same boat, and that's just part of it. And then you could extend the conversation, and you could say, you can go around the table here. I'm in my last 6 months of paying Social Security and Medicare taxes. There's a lot of youngins here who are paying Social Security taxes and Medicare taxes that pay for the monthly checks that seniors get in this town. I mean, they've probably gotten far more out of it than they ever paid into it. And these are all tough balances, but they're realities, and I think, people have to be confronted with it. Not easy.
So on the second slide of recommendations for FY19, the last slide on page 6, the printout, given that the number in red is going to change, are we comfortable with the other two statements in the other two bullet points in this slide? Great. Slide 20, first slide on page 7, key conclusions. Again, I believe it was part and parcel of what we did last year and where we were going to this year, that we want to, now that we've done this gotten these two outside assessments of our capital buildings, let's move on them. This second bullet on the key conclusion slide, I believe this was recommended to me by 2 members, and I think this may be the most contentious of the items in this presentation. Are we comfortable being this strong in our direction to the ABRSD School Building Committee? And I do have to caveat here that I found out we will get a new reimbursement rate number at the time of going for the building bond. And that will be the baseline upon which things like changing the size of the cafeteria, adding administrative suites and things like that would have a negative effect. So this 45.3 number probably needs to be pulled, but are we comfortable with this requesting a commitment from the ABRSD to adhere to the MSBA partnership and the set reimbursement rate at the outset of the project?
Do we need to say requesting commitment? Can we just say request ABRSD adhere, period, and from there?
Sure. The point here is that to the extent they go beyond what the MSBA authorizes, the taxpayers will be paying for that themselves 100%, as opposed to getting almost half of it back from the state. So it's something that, yeah, we should encourage, recommend, urge as strongly as possible that they try and stay within those guidelines.
We strongly recommend.
Yeah, I like the wording, and I just would probably say achieve maximum allowable reimbursement rate if you don't need to put a number in there because you don't know what the number is. So whatever that maximum allowable is, by them adhering to the rules, adhere to the partnership rules for new building construction.
Okay.
Well, if budgets are submitted to MSBA that are out of line with what was originally forecast, they might not pay anything. They won't accept the budget at all. They would demand that you go back and get it to where you promised.
But and that's absolutely true. And by all means, I suspect that the ABRSD would not go to the point of thumbing their nose at them this far down the line. But what I'm also concerned about is getting, call it 45% base rate, and then deciding, well, we can eat away a little here, and we can eat away a little there, we can eat away a little there, and now, the best we could possibly hope to get is 38. That's what I'm concerned with.
Right.
Okay, slide 20, middle slide.
1 second, Jason. Backing up to the second recommendations for FY19 slide. You discussed that taxes will increase by more than 2.5%. I believe that's using the money, I believe that doesn't require an override.
Correct. That's true. That's absolutely true.
I think you should call that out.
Okay.
Okay. Current ALG plan is to use the entirety of the unused tax level, and that will increase taxes without need of an override.
Yes. But I think you want the by more than 2.5%.
Without need of an override by more than 2.5%.
Increase taxes by more than 2.5%.
Without need of an override.
Yeah, without, yeah.
Increase taxes. So much less words on a slide. Okay, done. I made that change. Okay, key conclusions, middle slide, page 7. So this top bullet, I'm prepared to pull it at this time because after the ALJ meeting, after the working group of the school building committee, and with the current strong belief that it will be brought forward to the school committee writ large to take the 1.2 to 1.3 million minus the 45.3% reimbursement rate from the MSBA out of E&D. Okay. So I'm prepared to pull the top line. Okay.
And this next one, I don't recall agreeing, and maybe you guys had the discussion, but we're willing to do a capital override to fund these capital repairs?
I'm pretty sure I pulled some of this straightforward from last year. Yeah, there was definitely a line in last year where we're saying, hey, if we're not going to be able to do anything, either the municipal side or the school side, strictly from operating expenses. So when and if we get around to actually addressing the capital needs, we're trying to forecast that people should be aware of the possibility that this is coming.
I guess I wouldn't consider it near term at the pace we're moving.
I'm sorry.
I wouldn't call it a near term.
Okay. I'll pull near term.
Yeah, and I guess I was just again thinking about our discussion last year I was under the impression, again, that we would use reserves for these near-term capital repairs for the school and the town, and that we didn't discuss an override at that point.
Oh, okay, no, I remember now. Sorry. This is for the SIP side. This is not, this is the capital improvement plan. No. This is, so there are, even if you take out Douglas, Gates, and Conant, there's still another 14 some odd million worth of repairs to the rest of the schools that need to occur. And that is relatively near term. That's the 3 to 5 year range.
Then you need to spell that one out more clearly.
More words.
Yeah, more words.
More words.
Better words.
Make a final note. Okay. More words on SIP.
Move to adjourn.
Hush. I have one slide to go. Okay, last slide.
Also on borrowing costs are likely to be higher in the future. They will be, because I was...
Wait a minute. You know, we now have a banker on the committee. Tom, what do you think about borrowing costs going up in the future?
So I had.
You sound a lot like our bond analyst.
I had will go up, and someone told me I had to soften that language by quite a bit, and so I changed it to likely.
From what I heard this morning, CNBC, that Goldman Sachs is predicting 4 rate increases for next year, and there's possibly going to be one in December of this year as well.
So is the statement borrowing costs are likely to be higher in the future years inaccurate in any way, shape, or form?
No, it's accurate, but I'm just saying.
Done.
More than
the short end of the yield
are
curve,
likely.
not the long end.
I think it's a given.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're not going to talk about the yield curve in our point of view.
Slide 21, moving right along. Changes in the air. Everyone's comfortable that this is what's going on in the near future. Life is good. I'm done with this. Let's move on to the next point.
There's a confusion in that thing between years. There are calendar years and there are fiscal years, and you've got to straighten that out. Because when this thing goes out, we're going to be in a school year. Kids are going to be in school classes. So when you talk about this school year, and is the town manager going to leave in June, or is he going to leave in December of 2018? That's just needs to be straightened out.
Okay.
All right, thank you, Jason. We have minutes from June 13th and June 27th that Dave circulated. Can I have a motion?
Yeah, Jason proposed an edit to one of them.
You're kidding. Goes both ways, huh?
Is regarding the River Street proposal. And in the middle of the June 13th minutes, I have possible resolutions include greater than expected FY17 turnbacks on River Street purchase could be reimbursed by CPC, although town staff doesn't believe this would be in time, and he proposed to say in time to count as free cash for FY19.
Okay.
53 River Street.
Thank you.
Okay, can I have a motion to approve June 13th as amended?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Go on.
Do we have enough votes?
Hmm? No. June 27th. Dave, any changes there?
No.
Okay, can I have a motion to approve the minutes of June 27th?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Two. Well, that's right, you were sick. Okay, committee reports. I did not go to the Board of Selectmen meeting last night. I do know one thing they did. They appointed the town manager search committee, and they appointed a truly outstanding group of individuals. And oddly enough, both John Benson and I have been included in that. Janet, is there anything you want to talk about on the Board of Selectmen's meeting last night? Please.
No, we did that. That was the easy part, the appointment of the search committee. I think that we had a continued hearing about the storage facility that is on Post Office Square, some modifications and all that. A longer discussion than I would have liked about sidewalk donations in lieu of installation of sidewalks and the pricing, and the debate about prevailing wage, because the developer doesn't want to make a donation at prevailing wage rates when he could install a sidewalk for much cheaper, but that isn't the point. In any event, and then we had a presentation by the developers for 40B project at 184 Main Street, and that generated a fair amount of comment from the neighbors, whom and some of us had already heard from at the public meeting, but the whole point of it was to get the board's endorsement of the preliminary project, which will go to the state for preliminary review with regard to the site, and then the whole project, if it gets through that, will come back to the town, to the Zoning Board of Appeals for a full-blown comprehensive permit hearing, and everybody will have another chance to weigh in, but of course everybody wanted to weigh in last night. And then we had some discussion about this MBTA monopole installation that's occurring all along the commuter rails, and the idea is it's supposed to enhance Wi-Fi service on the commuter trains. I guess it's not exactly smooth, and I don't know because I don't take the commuter rail, but I think the issue was that the project got started with very minimal notice to the communities that were affected, and the only outreach we got was from somebody who had been hired by the company that's installing these poles, who was charged with checking on concerns about impact of the monopoles on historical and cultural resources. We are slated to get 4 poles, one of which is in South Acton, in the Maple Street vicinity, and so the Historical Commission weighed in on that, said try to move the pole, do a balloon test to see what the impact would be visually. There are 3 other poles, one of which is on Windsor Ave, and I think some of the Windsor Ave residents were upset that the Historical Commission didn't sort of protect them as well by weighing in, because the pole is right behind some of the houses, the historical houses on Windsor Ave. So anyhow, now the people want us to weigh in again. And I think probably what's going to happen is I'm going to draft a letter to the MBTA Control Board, which is having a meeting, if not later this month, in next month, to talk about this project, because it's been so controversial that they put a hold on the project so that they can, excuse me, they can review and talk with people, the residents who are upset about it. But that also took some discussion. Otherwise, our meeting would have, well,
been an hour, right?
Yeah, it would have been an hour. But I just, every time Chapter 40B comes up, that there's a prolonged discussion, and there are some people in town who contribute to the sort of the extension of the meeting beyond what I would like it to be, but anyhow, be that as it may. But,
thank you.
Yeah, so I've spared you, and I guess this is, if you don't have a liaison to the meetings, I'd be happy to, I can provide a summary. I did that once in a while when you missed meetings.
Still looking for one.
Yeah, well, it's just that it's easy enough for me to summarize it, although I really right now don't want to be working on drafting anything else for anybody else, because I've got enough of my own drafting, so thanks. We just voted to authorize the chairman to sign the application. It's an application for a preliminary site approval that the developer has to prepare, and the basis for that application is to show that the proposed location is convenient to transportation, to services, and that sort of thing, and a lot of the financial review is going to occur at the state level. I mean, our role is really to do the initial screening, and Nancy Tavernier's committee, the Acton Community Housing Corporation, has met with the developer and has recommended it. So and they've met with other town staff people, so it's technically considered to be a friendly 40B, meaning that they meet with the town, they get the town buy-in, they make modifications to the proposal. They've met with the design review board, and they've incorporated a lot of the DRB's changes. But the trouble is that, you know, from my perspective anyway, or the town's perspective, is that the neighbors are still not really happy. There are a number of people who are concerned about the traffic. The addition of 8 units on Main Street, but anyhow, what? It's just under, it's like 0.8 acre, and it's been the site of a single family historical house, although a rather shabby looking historical house that was allowed to deteriorate, which is what happens, and then all these people who are big on historic preservation seem to disappear when it comes time to buying, salvage, saving these houses. And so then the Historical Commission put a 1-year demolition delay on the house, after which the developer is planning to just proceed with the development. But we also heard from some historic preservation people about the fact that this project entails the demolition of a house. But nobody's out there doing something other than complaining that the developer or the town should save all these houses, and it's not feasible. So
how many units, Janet?
It's 8. It's 2 buildings of 4 units each. So they're dense. They're denser, but it's not like it would be much worse if they tried to jam in single-family homes, which has happened in other places in town, and with, I would say, not really good results. But it's still, it's across the street from the Discovery Museum, and there are people, on the one hand, they like the Discovery Museum, which has much bigger parking, a lot more cars going in and out, but on the other hand, they're complaining about the concern, one of the concerns about this 8-unit proposal is the traffic it will generate, which, you know, it's adding to Main Street, which is a big problem. It's an area problem. It's not necessarily the fault of this project, but it's an argument that people will make. But I don't know if it goes through the state process and then comes back. I have no idea what will happen to it. I mean, one of the concerns aesthetically is the fact that the building is big, and there are some bungalow-style houses, I guess, or one bungalow-style house on one side. So just visually, the disparity between the two buildings is a concern for some people. So, but it's a 40B project, and it's a law that a lot of people resent. But I don't think that there's any appetite on Beacon Hill to change it to help the affluent communities, you know, because I think the idea behind it was to make all those affluent communities pay their share by providing affordable housing, and that's, you know, that's why we have it.
Are we any closer to getting to safe harbor provision as a result of the Powder Mill Road 40B?
Well, yeah, it's my understanding, I haven't looked at the numbers, but it's my understanding even if Powder Mill Road gets approved, and in that case it's a rental, so all of the units in Acton that are rentals would count toward the 10%. It's my understanding we still wouldn't be there.
No, I know we would not be at the 10%.
Yeah.
We'd only be at like 8 or 8.9, but we'd be at the safe harbor line.
Yeah, we would have a year where we wouldn't have to consider a 40B. You know, I think that's the way it works. We have a goal, we have a housing production plan, and if we meet the goal, the annual goal, then we get a break from considering a 40B. But I think that we've historically pursued kind of friendly 40B projects, smaller scale. And I think that the problem is that if you're talking about owner-occupied, the ratio is it's three market rate for every single affordable, and so you're adding more market rate for every for you know, a lot more market rate than you are affordable, and you're always sort of slipping backwards. I mean, I just see it as we're walking uphill in sand or something. You're constantly going backwards, and that's why some towns like Concord have resorted to having huge rental projects where they all count toward the 10%, and they get to that 10% really quickly. And those, we have one. I mean, Avalon is sort of a development like that. But you know, if we had another parcel of land that nobody cared about, we could just stick another huge complex there. But during our 2020 planning process, some residents said that isn't our town to have big high-rise complexes on the edge of town. So the alternative is to try to bring them into the residential areas, or the areas where people are and which they care about, which then generates a different controversy because nobody wants them there. So, yeah.
But Janet, what happens to the sewer betterments? Presumably that house paid one sewer betterment when the sewer went down. Will this now pay for an additional 7?
Yeah, I assume that they would have to pay more because they have more intense use. But I don't. Yeah. We're the sewer commissioners, but I honestly, we don't have to deal with sewering issues very often. I'm going to have to deal with it on the West Acton Sewering Committee because I'm unfortunately supposed to be the board rep, which means I'm unfortunately the chairman under the terms of the charge. So I will be much better informed about sewering by the time this year is over. So
thank you,
anyhow,
Janet.
thank you.
Any other committee reports?
Question? Does 40B qualify if it's a senior residence, like over 55 community, if there are 10 places that are put in there and they're for seniors and you have so many affordable units for seniors?
I think that if you're building it, it doesn't matter if you have an age limitation or if it's about the pricing of the units. If you commit to providing a certain percentage of affordable units, then you're allowed to build denser housing than what, that's really the issue that a lot of people see locally with 40B is that you can bypass all of the local restrictions. So density is one thing, and so they can build more units than they otherwise would be allowed to on a parcel, but it is the hitch is that you have to provide a certain percentage of affordable units. But yeah, you can do that with senior housing.
I asked the question because when you said there's a friendly affordable Bs and there are unfriendly affordable Bs,
well,
and the reason I say that is a senior 10 houses is going to have a significantly less impact on the cost side than 10 houses with 2 children each going into the schools, but they'll pay the same taxes. So, given the choice, if we had the opportunity to steer towards a senior, and we have a wonderful program for seniors in the town, and we certainly want to encourage our seniors to stay in town, and they can't afford perhaps $500,000 house, but maybe a $200,000 condo, and therefore this would be an opportunity for them to move to a more affordable way and still stay in the town. So I would hope that, we have that opportunity to encourage that kind of 40B.
Yeah, I've never, in the time that I've been dealing with affordable housing and 40Bs, I haven't encountered an instance where a developer came in and said, okay, I want to do a 40B, and was persuaded by the town to make it for seniors. If a developer's going to do that, that's going to be upfront. And I think that what I've seen is a lot of developers building, they're building so-called cottages for which they're catering to an adult market, no kids and all that, but they're huge. And, they're saying, well, there's people who are downsizing. They're downsizing to houses that are 2,500 square feet and cost, $600,000, and I'm thinking, well, that wouldn't be downsizing for me. But I don't know where these people apparently were living, in mansions before, and now they're slumming it in these, these crummy $600,000 houses. But I think that it's very strange. There tends to be with these 40Bs, they often the developers seem to be building bigger units. Like the development on 184 Main it's three bedroom units, all of them. Sometimes there's a range, you have 1, 2, 3, but this is 3 bedrooms, so the assumption is that families will move in there, so, because there's no age restriction, so.
Okay. Any other committee reports? Mike.
Minuteman today submitted their 60% design development documents to MSBA. And the Main Street Planning Group held a public forum last week that was very well attended and got some pretty valuable community feedback. So we're moving 5 alternate plans were submitted, and the people got a chance to vote on each one. So we'll see what happens. That's moving forward.
School committee?
School committee met not 4 days ago, but 11 days ago, and voted members onto the interim school superintendent search. So Karen Sonner, Dawn Bentley, and one other, sorry, as voting members. Then
David Crane.
David Crane, thank you. God, it's my kid's principal. I should come up with his name. And then the school building committee working group met. I've already mentioned that, and we have a school building committee tomorrow night as well.
All right, new member orientation. So we have meetings scheduled for 25th of July, August 8th, August 22nd. I need, let's see, Jeff, Tom, Christine, and Christy to tell me one date that they can all be here. 25th is up. That's right, you told me that. Okay, that's good. So we are rapidly coming down to August 8th. Everybody do August 8th. All right. Then that will be new member orientation night. That will be the only thing on the agenda. You other members can either choose to come and be reoriented or actually participate from your experience, or skip it entirely. You can make your own decisions.
Do you want to talk about the Walker meeting that we had that last week in June?
Public forum?
Yes.
Yeah, as I
Do you want to go through the 5 options, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Briefly mentioned, there were, I think it was a public forum held right here in River City, room 204, and it was very well attended. The architect presented, or gave sort of a history of the project and his sort of marching orders. And he presented, I think, at least 5 different alternatives to the people, and explained each one of them based on the first scenario was what was permitted by right, which was, I believe, 7 house sites, which no one was very excited about, all the way up to option 4 and 5, which is, was like a 20 or so room inn, and a restaurant location, maybe some craft studios, and maybe some scenario for potential housing, not 40B housing, but could be senior housing maybe. But some all, like a farmer's market type scenario. But there are different scenarios that people seem to really appreciate the fact that it was what we were calling a gateway site. It's a prominent location in town. It would complement Kelly's Corner. It would benefit from the Main Street, whatever the street plan is called, street infrastructure improvements. It would complement its place in central Acton, the center of town. And I think most of the people sort of voted. I didn't see the final count, but it seemed like option 4 and 5, which was in sort of a restaurant or a marketplace type of environment that could be, that would be very well landscaped. It could be suitable for smaller functions, like like an outdoor wedding. You could house the people. You could feed the guests. You could have the ceremony outside in gardens. It was landscaping will play a heavy part, and some of it could be created as sort of an orchard or really open space, beautiful, just leaving it open. But there will be some commercial opportunities as well. So we'll see what happens. This was the first step, and it seemed like the people would like to see something positive instead of same old, same old. There are alternatives like putting if you want to unload the site tomorrow, you could put a bank and a convenience store there, and get your money back, but that's not what the people want. So they're going to be talking to developers, get their input, and but I think it was very positive and successful meeting.
All right, any other business that needs to come before the committee? Tom, unfortunately, the newest member gets to move to adjourn every single meeting, and since you're the last one in, you may have this duty for a while. Christine got rid of it rather rapidly.
Motion to adjourn the meeting?
Second. All in favor? Aye. Meeting's adjourned.